I learned to set 2 plates even though I ate alone. Practice, I told myself. Preparation for a life I wasn't sure I deserved. 6 months I'd been on this ranch. 6 months since I'd arrived as a mail-order bride to a widowed rancher whose face I'd seen only in a faded photograph. 3 months since fever took him, leaving me with land I barely knew how to work in a community that whispered behind gloved hands. The garden needed weeding. It always needed weeding. I knelt in the dirt as the sun dropped toward the mountains, pulling up wild grass that grew faster than anything I'd planted. My hands knew this work. They'd known harder work, too, but I tried not to think about that. Some evenings, if the wind was right, I could smell pine from those mountains. The scent made my chest tight, made me remember things I'd come west to forget. I fed the chickens at dusk. Counted them twice because I always counted everything twice now. 13 hens. 1 rooster who crowed at the wrong times. The barn cat wound between my ankles, patient for milk. I gave it to her in a chipped bowl, watching her lap with single-minded focus. Animals were honest that way. They wanted what they wanted and didn't pretend otherwise. Inside, I lit the lamp and made coffee. Strong enough to strip paint. My father used to say, I'd forgotten how to make it any other way. Forgotten sugar existed. Forgotten sweetness was possible. The cabin still felt strange. My husband's things were mostly gone. I'd packed them away after the funeral. Unable to look at his pipe, his extra boots, the way his coat hung waiting for shoulders that would never fill it again. But traces remained. A water stain on the ceiling where rain had come through before he fixed it. His neat handwriting on labels in the root cellar. Small reminders that I was living someone else's life. I'd tried. Lord knows I'd tried. Learned to wear dresses instead of the buckskin I'd lived in before. Learned to speak softly instead of the clipped commands mountain survival had taught me. Learned to take up less space, make less noise, be less of whatever it was about me that made people uncomfortable. When did I start measuring my worth by how quiet I could be? How small I could make myself? The mountains taught me to take up space. To be loud meant staying alive. Here, silence was survival of a different kind. In town, conversation stopped when I entered the mercantile. Women turned away. Men watched with something between suspicion and fear. They didn't know what to do with a woman who needed no one. So they made me an outsider. I told myself it didn't matter. Told myself I'd survived worse than gossip and cold shoulders. But some nights like this one, the loneliness felt like a physical weight. I still slept facing the door. Still kept a knife under my pillow. Still startled at unexpected sounds. My body remembering threats my mind tried to forget. You can leave the mountains, but the mountains don't leave you. I'd come west to be someone softer, someone who belonged, someone who could set 2 plates and maybe, someday, actually need the second one. I didn't know belonging had to be earned in blood and ashes. Didn't know the price would be this high. That evening, standing in my garden as the last light bled from the sky, I felt satisfied with the day's work. The fence was mended. The animals were fed. The weeds were pulled. Small victories, but they added up to something like purpose. I didn't know this was the last peaceful evening I'd have. Didn't know that by dawn. Everything I'd tried to build would be ash and smoke. Didn't know the woman I'd been trying to bury was about to claw her way back to the surface. Some nights I missed the mountains. Missed the honesty of predators. At least there. I knew who wanted me gone. The smell woke me. Smoke, thick and wrong. I had maybe 2 minutes. The mountains taught me to count seconds when they matter. My hand found the knife under my pillow before my eyes fully opened. The floor was already hot through my bare feet. Orange light flickered under the bedroom door, and I heard the sound wood makes when it starts to surrender, that low crackling that sounds almost peaceful. Until you understand what it means. I grabbed what I could, the knife, always. My husband's rifle from beside the door, a leather satchel with papers, a few coins, my good coat. Other women might have saved photographs. I saved what keeps you alive. The back door was already burning. I kicked out the window instead, threw the satchel through first, then climbed out into the night wearing nothing but my nightdress and determination. The heat hit like a fist. I stood in the yard, feet in cold grass, watching flames consume the only home I'd tried to make in 6 years. The roof caught with a sound like thunder. Sparks spiraled up toward stars that seemed too far away to matter. That's when I saw them. Figures on the ridge, dark against the slightly lighter dark of pre-dawn sky. Too many to count. Too deliberate to be accident. They'd come to watch. They wanted to see me run. I saw their disappointment when I stayed standing. Fire reveals what's foundational. Everything that couldn't burn the stones, the earth, the iron of who I was. That's what remained. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe that's what they accidentally taught me. I remembered the last time I'd lost everything, how I'd walked into those mountains with nothing and walked out 3 years later, still breathing. If I survived that, I could survive this. Dawn came slow. The watchers on the ridge disappeared as light touched the valley. Cowards. All of them. At least have the courage to face what you've done. I walked through the ashes, once they cooled enough. The foundation was intact. Stone doesn't burn. The barn had survived, far enough away to escape the flames. The animals were fine, spooked, but safe. I'd lost the house, but I hadn't lost everything. The community would expect me to leave now. Pack up, admit defeat, ride away to wherever women like me went when we finally broke. They'd whisper about it in town. How the strange widow couldn't take it. How maybe it was for the best. Part of me wanted to give them that satisfaction. Part of me wanted to ride back to the mountains. Disappear, survive alone again. It would be easier, safer. The woman I'd been before knew how to do that, knew how to need nothing from anyone. But I stood in those ashes as the sun rose, and I made a different choice. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was just being tired of running from everything that scared me. They burned my ranch to make me leave. Instead, they gave me a reason to stay. I stood in what used to be my kitchen and made a promise, not to them, but to myself. I would rebuild. And this time, I'd do it on my terms. No more trying to be smaller, softer, less. No more apologizing for being competent. No more pretending the mountains hadn't happened. If they wanted me gone, they'd have to do better than fire. 3 days into rebuilding, he appeared. I was measuring foundation stones, trying to remember my father's lessons about load-bearing walls. When I heard a horse, I didn't look up. If it was more trouble, I'd face it when it arrived. I'd learned that much in the mountains. Most threats announce themselves if you wait. But this one came with lumber. Jacob. I'd noticed him before, though I'd pretended not to. the quiet ranch hand from the neighboring spread who touched his hat when I rode past town, who didn't laugh with the others at the mercantile, who had kind eyes and careful hands and worked harder than men twice his size. Now he was in my burned yard with enough lumber to frame walls and nails to hold them together. "I don't need help," I said. My voice came out harder than I meant. 3 days of working alone had sharpened my edges. He set the lumber down beside the foundation. Didn't argue. Didn't explain. Just looked at me with those steady eyes and said, "It's not pity. Then what is it? Recognition." He paused, choosing his words like they cost money. "You remind me that surviving alone is possible, but it's not required." I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him I'd been surviving alone just fine for years. Wanted to tell him to take his lumber and his recognition and leave me to my ruins. But something in his voice stopped me. Something that sounded like understanding instead of judgment. "I know where to find me if you change your mind," he said, and rode away before I could form a response. That night, I found supplies I hadn't saved. Coffee, sugar, lamp oil, a small bag of dried apples. Left where my porch used to be, weighted down with a smooth river stone so the wind wouldn't scatter them. I could have thrown them out. Could have proved I needed nothing from anyone. Instead, I made coffee, real coffee, with sugar. The first decent cup I'd had in 3 days. It tasted like surrender, tasted like hope. I hated how much I'd missed both. My hands remembered carpentry. My father had taught me young, before I was old enough to understand that girls weren't supposed to know these things. I could measure twice, cut once, could tell when wood was green or seasoned, could build something that would stand, but I only had 2 hands. And building a house alone, even a small one, would take months, maybe longer. I remembered 3 months in the mountains without speaking to another human. The way my voice had sounded strange when I finally used it. The relief of silence. The agony of it. The mountains taught me self-reliance was survival. What they didn't teach was the difference between surviving and living. Maybe that's what burned the lie that being strong meant being alone. I worked until I couldn't see straight, measuring and planning by lamplight. When I finally slept, it was on the floor of what would become my bedroom, wrapped in my coat with the knife beside me. I dreamed of fire and mountains and a man's quiet voice saying, "Not required." I woke knowing he'd come back, knowing I wouldn't refuse him again, knowing that scared me more than any burning. He returned at dawn the next morning. I was already working, had been since first light. He didn't ask permission, just picked up a hammer and started framing the first wall. We worked in silence. His hammer, my saw, the rhythm of building something together. Days passed like that. He'd arrive at sunrise, work until dusk, never expecting food or gratitude. I stopped refusing his help with words. Let my actions speak instead when he framed a wall. I didn't tear it down. When he showed up with better lumber than I'd been using, I didn't argue about the cost. I noticed things. Small things that shouldn't have mattered, but did. The way he measured twice to avoid wasting wood. How he was gentle with nervous horses. Patient when they spooked. That he brought his own lunch and never made me feel obligated to feed him. The way his hands moved, confident. Practiced, but never showy. He wasn't trying to prove anything. Just building. One morning, I was cutting shingles when he commented on my knife work. You're precise, he said. Most people hack. You cut clean. You learn accuracy when missing means starving. I said before I could stop myself. He didn't press for more, just nodded like that made perfect sense. That's when I realized he wasn't trying to excavate my past. He was just accepting who I was now. Townspeople rode past sometimes. I felt their eyes. Felt them adding this to their list of things to whisper about the widow and the young ranch hand. Working alone together, unchaperoned. Let them talk. They'd burned my home. Their opinions had already cost me everything. What was one more whisper? We were framing the roof when he mentioned the wolves. Livestock going missing. 3 ranches hit in the past week. They're getting bold, he said. Miller lost 2 calves last night. I filed this away. Remembered mountain lessons about predator behavior. How they tested boundaries before they attacked. How they always followed patterns if you knew how to read them. That evening, working by lamplight to finish a corner joint, I caught myself listening for his footsteps the next morning. When had his silence become familiar? When had I stopped measuring his presence as threat? When had alone stopped feeling safe and started feeling lonely? I'd spent 3 years in mountains without missing human company. Now 3 hours felt long. I wondered when that changed. Wondered if it was him specifically, or if I'd just been lonely long enough that any kindness felt like water in a drought. The difference between him and other men he never tried to take over, never suggested I was doing things wrong, just worked beside me, following my lead. I didn't know how much I needed that until I had it. Some nights, I'd catch myself smiling at something he said. Small observations about weather, comments on our progress. I'd stop mid-smile. Remember, I was supposed to be guarded. Remember, smiling led to softness, led to burning. But the smile stayed anyway. The frame was complete by the end of the second week. Walls standing, roof ready for shingles. We stood back and looked at what we'd built together, not just the structure, but the easy silence, the shared purpose, the way we fit like well-joined wood. You need help with the roof, he asked. I looked at him. Really looked. Saw the question behind the question. Saw him asking permission to stay, to keep helping, to keep showing up at dawn. Tomorrow, I said, then added, quieter, thank you. He smiled, small but real, and I let myself smile back. We were laying shingles when my hand slipped. I caught myself on the roof beam, kept from falling, but my shoulder wrenched hard. The old injury, the one from years ago, from a fight I'd nearly lost. Pain shot down my arm like lightning. I tried to hide it, kept working, favoring the other arm, but he noticed. He always noticed. You're hurt. I'm fine. You're not. He climbed down, held the ladder steady. Come down. I'll finish. I know you can, but you don't have to. His voice was gentle but firm. Come down. I wanted to argue, wanted to prove I could work through anything. But the shoulder was screaming now, and pride seemed less important than not falling off my own roof. He finished the section while I sat in the shade, holding my arm, angry at my own weakness. I can't afford to be weak here, I said finally. They're waiting for me to fail. He was quiet for a long time. Then he climbed down and sat beside me. Accepting help isn't failure. It's what people do. People. When did I stop thinking of myself as people? When did I become something else? Something harder, sharper, more alone? My shoulder throbbed. The pain made me honest, made me tired of carrying everything by myself. I came from the mountains, I said. Didn't plan to say it, but it came out anyway. He waited. 3 years, alone. After I lost, I stopped. Started again. I learned to track, to hunt, to defend what was mine. I touched my shoulder. A mountain lion came for my winter stores. We fought. I had a knife. It was bigger, stronger, but I was more desperate. You killed it. I killed it, but it almost killed me first. Sometimes I don't know which of us won. The silence stretched. I waited for him to recoil, to see me differently, to understand finally that I was too hard, too damaged, too much. Instead, he said, "And then you tried to be someone softer." I looked at him sharply. "How did you know?" "Because I see it. The way you move, like you're trying to take up less space. Like you're apologizing for being competent." He met my eyes. Must have felt like cutting off a limb. My throat tightened. I thought if I could just be gentler, if I could just need people, then I'd belong somewhere. You belong here. Not in spite of who you are, because of it. I'd kept that story buried for 6 years. The mountain lion. The 3 years alone. All of it. Thought if I never spoke it aloud, I could pretend it never happened. Pretend I was someone softer. But sitting there with my shoulder aching and his eyes understanding, I realized I didn't want to pretend anymore. Didn't want to be softer. I wanted to be seen. He finished the roof. I made coffee the first time I'd offered hospitality. We drank in the gathering dusk, and the silence felt different now. Companionable. Riders interrupted. 3 men from town, dust-covered and worried. Wolves had killed 3 calves at the Miller Ranch overnight. More attacks across the valley. Children were afraid to go outside. They looked at me, looked at Jacob standing beside me, looked away. Their pride wouldn't let them ask. Not yet. Not from the woman they'd tried to drive away. After they left, I stood in my yard and thought about patterns, about predators and territory and survival. The mountains had taught me to read these things, had taught me to think like prey and hunter both. My mountain skills weren't shameful. They were necessary. The past I'd tried to bury might be exactly what this valley needed. The wolves escalated. 5 ranches hit in 1 week. A child was chased walking home from school. Livestock losses were crippling families who couldn't afford to lose a single calf. I saw the pattern they were missing. The pack was following the creek line, hitting at dawn, moving methodically north. I recognized the strategy because I'd used it myself, hunting in those mountains. Prey never sees the pattern until it's too late. But I wasn't prey anymore. They came on a Tuesday morning. A delegation, Mrs. Miller, the blacksmith, 3 ranchers whose names I'd never bothered learning. They stood in my half-rebuilt yard like penitents. I watched them struggle between pride and fear. Watched them choose fear. It should have felt like victory. Instead, It just felt sad. "We need help," Mrs. Miller said. She was a good woman, had 3 children, under 10. "The wolves, they're getting worse. Someone said that you might know." She couldn't finish. Couldn't bring herself to admit that the strange widow they'd whispered about had skills they needed. Every part of me that remembered ashes wanted to refuse, wanted to watch them fail, watch them learn what it felt like to be helpless. The mountain survivor in me said, yes, that's what predators do. They wait until weakness shows. But I looked at Jacob, standing quiet support beside me, remembered his words, surviving alone is possible, but not required. I wasn't a predator. I was trying to be something else. "I'll teach you," I said. Not help. Teach. Important difference. My ranch, tomorrow at dawn. Anyone who wants to learn tracking, wolf behavior, how to protect your livestock, I'll show you. They came. 15 people showed up the next morning, more than I expected. They stood in my yard where they'd burned my home 2 months earlier, and they listened. I taught them what signs to read, how wolves think, where they'll strike next, how to protect vulnerable animals. I showed them tracks, explained pack hierarchy, demonstrated how to read scat and marking patterns. Jacob helped, deferred to my expertise completely, never undermining, always reinforcing. The others began to listen not just to my words, but to the competence behind them. Teaching felt different than surviving. Survival was about taking every advantage, every opportunity, taking lives when necessary. Teaching was giving knowledge, giving protection, giving them the tools to save themselves. I'd forgotten how good giving felt, how powerful. Working with Jacob those days, teaching side by side, created a different kind of intimacy. His hand steadying my elbow over rough ground when I was demonstrating tracks, me teaching him a technique he didn't know, watching him practice until he got it right. Shared glances when a student succeeded. Nothing dramatic, but something building. They implemented my strategies, set up better fencing, changed how they pastured animals, posted watches at dawn when wolves were most active. The attacks slowed, then stopped. The wolves moved to easier territory. Mrs. Miller thanked me afterward, her voice genuine. "You saved my children," she said. "I should have. Before the fire. I'm sorry." I wanted to say, "Where were you when my home burned?" But I didn't. Because that's what the mountain survivor would have said. And I was trying to be someone who remembered that kindness cost less than revenge. That evening, watching Jacob fix my fence while students' horses grazed, I felt something shift. Not dramatic, quiet, like ice breaking after winter, like the first breath after holding it too long. I was afraid of what came next, but I was more afraid of going back to the mountains, back to alone, back to the woman who survived, but never lived. After everyone left, I sat alone in my rebuilt cabin. The success should have felt victorious. Instead, I was terrified. I'd let them see me, the real me, the woman with a mountain lion scar and 3 years of silence behind her eyes. What if they used it? What if, having gotten what they needed, they went back to whispers? What if I'd given them weapons and they burned me again? Deeper than that, I'd let Jacob close. Let myself feel things I'd sworn never to feel again. Let myself imagine possibilities that felt dangerous and precious and fragile as bird bones. The last time I'd let myself hope, I'd ended up a mail-order bride to a man I barely knew. Tried to be someone softer, gentler, more acceptable. 3 months later, I was burying him. 3 months after that, they burned my home. Why would this time be different? I packed my saddlebag. Didn't let myself think too hard about it. Just packed dried food, my knife, ammunition, my father's compass. The mountains were 3 days' ride. I knew trails that no one else remembered. Could disappear back into that life where vulnerability meant death and strength meant surviving. I'd done it before, could do it again. It wasn't happiness, but it was safety. And maybe safety was enough. Maybe happiness was the dangerous dream. I was tightening the saddle when I heard footsteps. Recognized them, I'd learned his walk, the rhythm of his boots on packed earth. He appeared out of the darkness, and I realized he must have seen my lamp burning too late. Must have known something was wrong. He looked at my packed horse, at my saddlebag, at my face. "You're leaving," he said, not a question. "I don't know how to be both," I said. The words came fast, desperate. The woman who survives alone and the woman who belongs somewhere. Every time I try to be softer, it destroys me. Every time I let myself need someone, he died. I know. Jacob stepped closer. And they burned your ranch. I know. And you're terrified it'll happen again. Aren't you? Terrified, yes. He was close enough now that I could see his face in the lamplight. But I'd rather be afraid together than safe alone. What if I can't do this? What if I'm too hard, too damaged? What if you're not? His voice was gentle but firm. What if the woman who killed a mountain lion with a knife and the woman who teaches patience to frightened? Neighbors, what if that's the same woman? What if you don't have to choose? I'd spent 3 years learning to need no one, 6 months trying to need everyone. And now I stood between two lives, the mountains that demanded nothing but took everything, and the community that asked for everything but might give something back. I was tired of choosing, tired of running, tired of being afraid my own strength would keep me alone forever. He said together. I whispered, more to myself than to him. Not, I'll protect you, or you need me. Just together. Equal weight. Equal risk. Standing there. I remembered the mountain lion. How we'd circled each other. Both wounded. Both determined to survive. How in the end we'd both walked away changed. Maybe that's what love was. Not avoiding the fight, but choosing which battles made you stronger. I looked at my packed saddlebag. At the horse ready to carry me away. At the man who'd come in the middle of the night because he somehow knew I was planning to run slowly. I began to unpack. Each item a choice. Each choice a small surrender. Not to him, but to hope. I'm afraid. I said, the most vulnerable thing I'd ever admitted. So am I. He answered, but I'd rather be afraid together than safe alone. We sat on my porch until dawn. Didn't kiss. Didn't make promises. Just sat. And somehow that was enough. Somehow, that was everything. I woke beside Jacob on the porch, both of us fully clothed, having fallen asleep mid-conversation. The sunrise painted the mountains gold and pink, and for the first time in years, I looked at them without feeling the pull to return. I'd survived worse than fear. Survived isolation, starvation, a mountain lion, a burning. What I hadn't survived yet was belonging. Maybe it was time to try. Come with me, I said. We rode into town together. I led. He followed. The way it should be. The town was waking shopkeepers sweeping porches, children heading to school. They stared as we rode down the main street. Always staring. But something was different now. Not just suspicion in their eyes. Attention. Respect. I gathered them in front of the schoolhouse. Mrs. Miller, the school teacher, the ranchers, the blacksmith. The people who'd watched my home burn and done nothing. The people whose children I'd saved from wolves. I'll keep teaching, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Not as hired help, not as a favor. As a community member, I listed what I'd offer: tracking lessons, survival skills, predator behavior education, wildlife safety for children, skills the valley needed. Skills only I had. Then I named my price. Respect, I said. No more whispers, no more judgment. No more pretending I don't exist until you need something. I'm done making myself smaller to fit your comfort. I looked at each of them in turn. You either accept who I am, or you don't. But you don't get my skills without my dignity. The silence stretched. I waited. Let them feel the weight of what I was asking. What I deserved. Mrs. Miller spoke first. We should have accepted you from the start. Should have helped after the fire. Her voice shook. My children are alive because of you. That matters more than pride. The school teacher stepped forward. Would you come talk to the students about wildlife safety, about survival? They should learn from someone, who knows? A rancher cleared his throat. My boy wants to learn tracking. Would you teach him proper? Someone else, a woman I didn't know, said, you should charge for lessons. Would have been worth hiring months ago. The apologies came awkward. Halting? People who weren't used to admitting they were wrong. Trying anyway. I accepted them the same way. We were all learning. As we rode back to the ranch, I felt something settle in my chest. Not quite peace, but close enough. My lease ends next month, Jacob said as we unsaddled the horses. I knew what he was asking without asking. Knew what I wanted to answer. Took a breath and said it anyway. There's room here, if you wanted to stay. Not rescue, partnership. Two people choosing to build something together. This is your ranch, he said carefully. I'm not here to take over. I smiled, really smiled. I know. That's why I'm asking. I thought about the different ways to be strong. Alone in the mountains was one kind fierce, sharp, taking no prisoners, but this was different. This was choosing vulnerability while keeping your knife sharp. Choosing connection while maintaining boundaries. Choosing to belong without disappearing into belonging. Jacob looked at me like I was both the mountain survivor and the teacher. The hard and the soft. The solitary and the partnered. Like those weren't contradictions, but completions. I wanted to believe him. No. I was choosing to believe him. The second coffee cup sat on the shelf. I'd set it there yesterday without thinking. Old habit. I'd told myself then, truth. I admitted now, not habit hope. And maybe that was the bravest thing I'd done. Braver than fighting a mountain lion. Braver than rebuilding alone. Braver than staying when they burned my home. Setting out a second cup meant believing someone would stay. That evening, standing in my rebuilt kitchen, I looked at everything we'd built. The walls Jacob helped raise, the community I'd chosen to teach, the life I'd claimed on my own terms. I wasn't the woman who'd come west, hoping to belong anymore. I was the woman who'd built belonging herself. That woman was stronger than the mountain survivor ever was, because she'd learned something the mountains never taught your strongest, not when you survive alone, but when you choose your company. 6 months later, I stood in my ranch at sunset and took inventory. The second barn Jacob built stood solid beside the first. Our cattle, I'd learned to say our without flinching, grazed in the east pasture. Students' horses were tied at the rail, waiting for evening lessons. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the window I could see Jacob setting the table. 2 plates. Always 2 now. The teaching had become regular. Monthly lessons on survival skills, tracking, livestock protection. The school children came twice a month for wildlife safety. I'd become someone the community turned to not with suspicion, but with respect. Mrs. Miller greeted me by name in town now. The shopkeeper saved the good coffee beans for me. When new families arrived in the valley, I was the one they were told to meet first. She'll teach you how to survive out here, people said. Funny how that works. The things they'd feared became the things they needed. The woman they'd tried to drive away became the one they depended on. Jacob and I weren't married yet. My choice, my pace, he never pushed. We were building a life together first, the kind that didn't need a ceremony to make it real. He managed the cattle operations while I handled horses and teaching. True partnership. We complemented each other without one dominating. Some nights, lying beside him, I thought about the woman I'd been, terrified in those mountains, hardened by survival, desperate to soften into something acceptable. Now I understood I didn't have to choose. The strength that helped me survive alone became the strength I used to serve others. The skills I'd thought were too harsh for civilization turned out to be exactly what my community needed. They'd burned my ranch to drive me away, but fire reveals what's foundational. Everything that survived those flames, my skills, my resilience. My refusal to quit those became the building blocks of something better. And everything that burned the pretense, the performance, the trying to be less, I didn't miss any of it. Turns out ashes make good fertilizer. I'd spent years trying to be softer than I was, thinking strength would keep me alone. But I learned the truth. We're strongest, not when we survive in isolation, but when we use our strength to empower others. The past I tried to hide became my greatest gift, and the woman who once needed no one learned something better: how to let herself be part of something larger, without losing herself in it. A young woman from a new family asked me once what changed. How the woman who'd killed a mountain lion with a knife became the woman who teaches patience to children. I told her nothing changed. I'd always been both. I just stopped apologizing for the parts that made others uncomfortable. Stopped pretending my scars were weaknesses instead of proof I'd survived. Started believing that the hardest thing I'd ever fought wasn't predators or fire or isolation. It was the lie that I had to choose between strength and belonging. Now, standing in my ranch as the sun set, I wore practical clothes. My knife hung on my belt where everyone could see it, dirt under my nails from the day's work. Jacob's laughter floated from the barn. Students arrived for evening lessons. This was the life I'd chosen, the life I'd built from ashes. The ranch I rebuilt isn't just mine anymore. It's ours, mine and Jacob's, mine and the community's, mine and the future I chose instead of the one that was burned away. The mountains made me a survivor. The burning made me a fighter. But this life, this chosen life, made me something better. It made me whole. I learned that what doesn't break you doesn't just make you stronger, it makes you a shelter for others. And that, I've discovered, is worth more than any safety I could build alone. Worth more than any fortress I could hide behind. The woman who once killed mountain lions with only a knife now teaches children to respect wildlife. The woman who survived 3 years of solitude now can't imagine a day without shared coffee at sunset. The woman who thought belonging meant becoming someone else learned the truth. Belonging means finding people who let you be yourself. And as the sun sets on my ranch, our ranch, I stand comfortable in my own skin for the first time in years. Knife on my belt, dirt under my nails, Jacob calling me in for supper. Students laughing as they practice tracking in the failing light. This is the life I chose. The life I built from ashes. The life I finally deserve.